Welcome, everyone. My name is Boris Mann, and this is the third edition of our App Protocol Developer Tech Talks. And I'm here with Ændra, who's going to give us a talk about her process and interest in Bluesky and a little bit about the amazing work that she's done on labelers and the largest verified news feed. Take it away.
Um, yeah, so is my screen sharing correctly?
It says it has started screen sharing, but it is not. Let's see if
This is
that's visible for
pause.
everyone.
Uh, oh, resume. There we go. Do I need, oh, that's why. It's because I wasn't on the correct screen. Right. Sorry, go back.
There we go.
Hey, winning. So,
Oh, and one more thing, because we cover this in different ways. Feel free to ask questions or otherwise put stuff in the chat as we have usually, and we will save the chat. So links and other things like that are welcome. And Indra has asked that we hold questions until the end, so we'll do a Q&A at the end. And try and keep track of those things. Feel free to drop the questions in there in chat, and I'll help keep track of them at the end. Awesome. Thank you.
cool. So, hi, I'm Andra. This is my presentation from Feeds to Labelers, which I think is maybe still like a placeholder title and is in some ways a side effect of my insomnia, so I didn't really land on a better title in time. Ergo, the subtitle that is meant both to communicate my mental state and process. And suffice to say, that is meant to be more of a broader discussion about the internet and distributed social media and my history with both of them and why I do the things I do and the way I do them. So apologies if this is kind of all over the place and gets like embarrassingly personal at some points. It's in many ways a talk about artistic process as it is about technology. So with that in mind, um, yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about the stuff I've been building on Bluesky, and I say building using the present tense because all of them are like very much works in progress. I've undertaken them all in my spare time, and they should be considered as spare time projects in many ways. Spare time projects, art projects, they endeavor to be, well-constructed professional services, but in many ways they're passion projects. And as per the title, I'll be talking about my custom feed project and my third-party labeler project, as well as touching on my experience building out Bluemoji, which is another project I'm working on. But first, a boatload of extremely indulgent and highly embarrassing slides that only reinforce the notion that Bluesky is a retirement home for gifted millennials. Please bear with me. There's a point to all of this eventually, I swear. Um, yeah, so in many ways, I'm what one would describe as a child of the internet. I had a 28.8 kilobits per second connection to Prodigy at age 8 in 1995. Then that later became simpatico when I moved back to Canada. I was surprised to learn that my ISP had free web space included with the account. And so I found a website editor called Hot Dog Express, which was like a WYSIWYG thing, and I built a site and put it on the internet. I eventually had to do website maintenance, and the FTP interface of that basic app wasn't powerful enough to do what I wanted. So the lovely support people at Hot Dog Software gave me a free copy of their professional offering, which had much better FTP support and also had really good autocomplete and internal documentation. And that's how I learned HTML at age 12. Um, this brief encounter of FTP also got me interested in servers. So I borrowed Unix for Dummies from my local library and installed, I think it was initially Sysy Linux on an old 486 machine from my dad's office that they were trying to recycle. And that's how I began terrorizing the poor sysadmins of my local school district who had the misfortune of having to run a pilot project by Sun Microsystems at the same time, which was very fortunate for me because I had all these amazing Unix machines to suddenly play with. Um, I eventually got on the bad side because I was doing some like really annoying stuff, like, piping MP3s through like PC speakers and like piping the contents of /bin to my friend's terminal so they had to log out to be able to do anything again, and running Nmap on the school network. And eventually they gave me a bit of a slap on the wrist. But what it did is it kind of got me in connection with people around my school district and around my community who are doing things with technology and eventually like things with journalism. And I was editor of my student newspaper all throughout high school. And that connection between the technology and journalism side of my interest is something that is very it's a recurring theme through a lot of these slides. Also, like a lot of respect to any kind of sysadmins who have a high tolerance for kids doing stupid things on their networks, because like a big reason where I got anywhere like I am today is because of people being tolerant of kids doing silly things on networks. So this is my website from like 1997, and please forgive the atrocious pun because I remind you I was 10. It's about 2 or 3 years before I even started spelling my name with that A diphthong character. You can kind of see in some of the text I was already trying to get my friends and sister involved with online publishing, creating spaces to express themselves, and this will also be a recurring theme. Um, there's a few more autobiographical slides. Please bear with me. This is the first time I've done this presentation, so I don't know if it's like too much, but bear with me. So in grade 10, I started learning PHP. I had a really great computer science teacher who let me skip Visual Basic and go straight into web languages. I have a lot of respect for that professor because he was like teaching PHP like every morning to a room full of like, you know, grade 11s, grade 12s, working in notepad.exe without syntax highlighting or like any language features, PHP register globals on and stuff like that. And that's how I learned PHP. And I eventually got the highest mark in the class. I competed in a few skills competitions for web developers. Came third one time and got a copy of Dreamweaver, which I never used because I thought it created pretty bad markup. Though probably younger me would weep at sort of the syntax that React kind of generates these days. So at any rate, I eventually ran a blog site called Friends called Harry Squid, which was based off of a PHP-based flat file site generator. It's called Percy. It's sort of a P, I think. I forget what it was called though. This is a photo of it, circa 2007, which is after all my friends had kind of gone off to university. We tried to keep the site rolling, and we ran a few Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, kind of using to track those. I started spelling my name with diphthong, kind of at this point as well. It's also worth noting the post in like the left sidebar is probably like the first and last time I ever said anything positive about Elon Musk. I kind of just realized this. I was going through like archive photos, which I found a little bit amusing. Anyways, so yeah, in uni I went to Calgary, which was one province over from where I was, and started building WordPress and Drupal websites for just random small businesses around town, green, like various green charities, that sort of thing. Started consultancy, which continues to this day as Harry Squid Limited. I joined Facebook and Twitter, and that's kind of when my emergence onto the modern web sort of occurred, and that was my first instance with that. Um, Brief slide about this is what my consultancy looked like 2011. This is like a Joomla website, I think. I don't know who made the design. It's just some random template I used, but it kind of gives you a sense of like where my headspace was around that time. This is also my Twitter account. I was a blue tick once upon a time, and I was also at Andrew once upon a time. I have a lot of respect for the people at Twitter for helping me change my username, like as a professional when I was using Twitter. Kind of just about 2 years before Elon Musk took over, I think, and I'm really grateful for them helping me. I was on since 2008 and kind of made up a very non-trivial part of my internet consumption. Um, we're outside the autobiographical stuff. I'm sorry for how self-indulgent it's been. Please bear with me. But I present all this up front and go into all this detail because I feel like it helps illustrate what motivates me as a developer and why I care so much about Bluesky and AT Proto. So a bit more. I moved to London in 2011, attended City University's Interactive Journalism program. It was the first year it had ever run. I graduated from that, I think with not honors, but a distinction or something. I don't know. Worked, didn't really find any work in journalism for about like a year after graduation, and built a lot of Drupal and WordPress websites for like fashion and cosmetic brands. I've worked on Vivienne Westwood and Charlotte Tilbury's websites at various points, which is interesting. Eventually I had a spot of really good luck, and I got a role at the Times and Sunday Times, doing very similar work to the kind of work that I'm doing now. I won't say much about that job, other than it gave me a lot of time and space to become very proficient at JavaScript, which is a language I kind of struggled with previously. Shouts out to my former colleague, Anike Alves, who I only worked with for about, I think, 4 or 5 months or something, but he was like a Node.js early adopter, and that really encouraged me to look more at JavaScript as a technology that could be used in a very wide array of, various use cases, and to kind of move past PHP and into other web languages. So in 2016, I moved to my current role at the Financial Times, and I started about a week after the Brexit vote and only a few months before that US presidential election. I remember like a really big period of soul searching after the election and after the referendum, and I stood pretty horrified at my front row seat to a sense of creeping fascism in both British and American societies. I became increasingly concerned about the environment for misinformation created by social media. I started to use terms like threat vector to describe social media encounters. I decided I couldn't be in the closet anymore, but it would take another half decade for me to come out as trans. I changed a lot of my life around. I left a really kind of broken codependent relationship, and I kind of started, it made me become a little bit more serious about life, kind of experiencing that. And kind of around that time, I discovered Mastodon, which was a really big thing for me. I learned who I was as a trans woman because of the vibrant queer community there. It made me realize that the hatred for LGBTQ people that I frequently saw on Twitter just really wasn't there on platforms that had good moderation. It gave me a sense of hope that I really desperately lacked at that moment. I really want to try running my own instance. I worry about the atmosphere from misinformation rather, sorry, in the Fediverse lacking Twitter's centralized verification features and fact-checking tools. And I want to encourage journalists to join the Fediverse, mainly because I thought it was cool and felt that people who are serious about emergent technology should explore that space more. Mastodon reminded me of the internet I grew up with. And I found myself shitposting with other trans people until 4 o'clock in the morning some nights. I built a few things for myself to make the platform easier to use, and I found that I had an audience of people who appreciated those tools. But throughout all this, I also worried that journalists would eventually arrive, and their arrival would impact the communities I was a part of. The Fediverse at that time was very news averse. It still kind of is in many ways, which I'll get into, but it was especially so back then. I worried that an emergent news media culture on the Fediverse would change things. I felt that to maybe, be proactive about this, creating a space for journalists that had strong verification tools as a unique selling point, and also would help prevent disinformation that way. And also, if it became popular enough, all the journalists would be concentrated on one instance, and anybody who didn't want to engage with news and politics could just do a domain block, and they would be free of news media content if they so wanted to. That was actually a consideration. And so I established forestate.media as an attempt to kind of create some sort of social good. Users were required to use a crypto tool called Keybase to verify their account. We were one of Keybase's partners. They had us in their list of things to verify with at one point. Despite there being like 6 people on our instance or something, it was really unpopular. But Keybase's trust network idea really resonated with me, and I felt it could be a really effective way to let journalists use their established Twitter presences to validate their new presences in a decentralized space. It never really took off. I managed to get a few people at the FT to join it, as well as a few journalists from a few other places who dipped in from time to time, but I didn't really feel it was accomplishing much and really doing what it was intending to, and I was paying server bills month after month for like no really good reason. So I killed it, and literally later that week, Twitter was taken over by Elon Musk. I remember kind of kicking myself at the time because 2 instances sprung up that I immediately tried to do kind of what I did, but kind of like less effectively and with less sort of immediate knowledge of the norms and kind of culture of the Fediverse. But in hindsight, shutting down forestate.media when I did was probably one of the most prescient things I've done, because I probably would have gotten fed up and left the entire decentralized social media space as a result of what came next. So the early experiences of the journalism-focused instances on Mastodon were rough. One of them posted a link to a Fediverse monitoring tool, like Fedi blocking monitoring tool, that was allegedly run by anti-trans harassment group Kiwi Farms, and another allowed accounts that had previously posted transphobic content to be on their instances. Even the instance that was started later on by someone who actually had a bit of experience with Fediverse culture made the mistake of letting Newsmax create an account on their instance, which itself resulted in widespread defederation. When the BBC's, like British Broadcasting Corporation's research and development labs created an instance to try and encourage more BBC stations and programs to post on the Fediverse, they were met with severe backlash due to some of the BBC's previous news reporting. I realized my hopes that the Fediverse would grow into a viable Twitter alternative were probably diminishing, and a cadre of early adopters kind of blew any chance of the platform growing due to an emergent mass media presence there, in my opinion. It really, you know, there was a push on there, and then there was so much pushback, and I kind of understand why people left. In a lot of ways, I can't blame both people for leaving on the journalism side and people for pushing back on the existing community side. I grew up as a queer person in Mastodon's protective culture. I found myself as a trans woman as a result of Mastodon's protective queer culture. I learned to speak the language of content warnings and alt text. I appreciate the affordance of a platform which protected queer communities from spending their entire existences moderating against hatred. The FediBlock hashtag, which is used by instances to communicate about known bad actors. For all its faults, it's helped protect me and many other people from roaming gigs of the most rancid transphobic fascists you've seen on any platform, and I include Twitter in that approximation. The ability of Fediverse instances to simply disconnect from other instances, and by doing so, block both sending and receiving content between them, was on one hand extremely good for creating a uniquely safe space for queer people to exist, but on the other hand, was very much reflective of the quality of the people running your instance. There was really a conversation on Bluesky last night between I got like a few people who I follow talking about this dynamic and how you know, you're told it's like pick an instance, any instance, but what's not ever communicated with that expression is, oh, by the way, people who are running that instance who, you know, you probably don't know in person, if they cause any drama and that results in everyone not wanting to talk to your instance, well, you probably have to move to another one anyways. But yeah, so where was I? So for much of my life on the Fediverse, I opted out of that dynamic entirely and posted mostly from a single user instance that I myself controlled. I'd already needed to migrate my account once due to the instance I was on, bofa.lol, dying, and I didn't want to have to do that again. So from this experience, I realized I was being hopelessly naive when I imagined for a state being something that users could opt out of by individually domain blocking that instance. It wasn't really about just not seeing sensitive content. It was preventing the establishment of media presences on that platform that possibly had a spotty track record with regards to various institutional failings like racism, transphobia, xenophobia, the list goes on. And across the profession, there's probably various things that my profession does to exacerbate those issues year after year. We're not perfect. And so, like, again, I can't really blame the Fediverse for taking the protective stance that it did. And like, trust me when I say that few people are more kind of acutely aware of the failings of my industry to give minorities professional respect and dignity, like, than I am. Like, I'm head of my company's LGBTQ network. I sit with the heads of other company LGBTQ boards once a month, and the kind of complaints people have are consistent. It's challenging. And like, I also am a member of the Trans Journalists Association. I've heard stories that would shock you about how bad it is out there in the industry for trans journalists and trans people in general. And I also consider myself extremely fortunate to have landed where I did. But I also believe in journalism as an important social good. I believe we need people who are professionally dedicated to telling the stories of others. So remember our history and for injustices to be exposed. My belief is that the great strides the British trans community made in the early 2000s were due to engaging with politicians and the media, not by becoming insular. I believe we're an easier target when we become pariahs and step out of society. I believe that trans people look at this entire sphere of civil society and say, this isn't for people like us. Then it never will be. So at the same time, I also believe news content, for all of its warts, is crucial for widespread adoption of a social media platform. If you consider the 1-9-90 rule, where 1% of the users of a platform actively create new content, 9% of the users comment, update, or otherwise engage with that content, and 90% are silent consumers of that content, excuse me, you realize that social media experiences that focus purely on creators are kind of in some ways doomed to failure. The silent lurker majority depends on social media for news content, as well as to connect with the culture that it finds meaningful. So it won't go until that culture exists and until that news exists. Journalists, and I use that term loosely, not just people who work at, established newspapers, but there's lots of people who do journalism in the world. And so I use that term very loosely a lot of the time. Journalists are very important bridges for that audience in my mind. The biggest accounts on any social media platform are always artists, athletes, celebrities, politicians, and their audiences are enormous. Their presence on a platform signifies it as an important space in society. But what causes those accounts to appear on platforms in the first place? My guess is it's journalists, because big accounts rely on journalists for engagement and visibility. So my personal theory is this: the first arrivals in any alt social media space are like, social media enthusiasts, i.e. nerds, and people who find the mainstream platform stifling or hostile, trans people. This is as far as Mastodon got in a lot of ways in my mind. But after them, then arrive journalists seeking to cover a vibrant new space their audience likely hasn't seen before. And the big accounts arrived next, seeking visibility from those journalists and knowing that their audiences will follow. And eventually they do, and there arrives the other 90%. So if we want these spaces to grow, my suspicion is we need journalists on them. And how do we do that? Well, we start by getting them off of Twitter. The immense cultural pull that Twitter has on journalists cannot be overstated. It's not for nothing my Twitter use skyrocketed during journalism school. It is presented as both the ultimate way to get scoops as well as build an audience. Twitter usage patterns are deeply rooted in journalists. But Bluesky gives me hope because it shows that change can happen. And even though it lacks incredible network effects that platforms like Threads have, progress is happening. I'm not going to talk very much about my FT work on Bluesky because I don't want my opinions to sound like they're any reflection of my employer's opinions. And so once again, all opinions about media and journalism are mine alone. Suffice to say, I helped set up the FT's institutional presence on Bluesky, and I work closely with our social media team to make our accounts as vibrant and informative as possible, despite the fact they're all automated, really. For a while, people on Bluesky joked that the only journalists on the platform were FT, and as much as I'd love to take credit for that, I think maybe like 2 or 3 FT journalists who joined were kind of at my behest. The rest of them totally figured it out by themselves, and they joined totally of their own volition, which is like really exciting, and like I really enjoy following them. And so like, why did that happen? I think it happened because the platform was accessible to them. They didn't have to pick an instance. They didn't have to learn CW etiquette. News sources can self-verify themselves using simply their domain names, and journalists who have portfolio websites can do the exact same. Features like starter packs help emerging communities find each other. If you need to switch your handle for some reason, you can do that and not lose all your followers. These are extremely practical things for journalists who are looking for an off-ramp from Twitter. The ability to self-verify your account using your handle and a well-known domain is especially useful for established media orgs like my employer. Compared to the rolling disaster that is currently Twitter's verification system, a social media editor wanting to stand up an institutional presence on Bluesky needs only bother one of their own company IT people to get verified effectively. I saw this affordance as particularly relevant to news media early on, and so I established the verified news feed pictured here. The newsfeed almost didn't happen though. I started mine pretty early, but it didn't get much notice and I didn't promote it at all. A photojournalist in the US started a very similar feed and allowed both verified and bsky.social handles on it. One of the bsky.social handles accounts claimed to be the Kiev Independent and amassed several thousand followers before it was revealed that that was actually like an imposter. When that was exposed, the feed creator kind of deleted the account in protest. And so people for like about a week were wondering like, where did the news feed go? And I saw it come up like quite a lot in my feed. I sort of felt the risk of like that same scenario playing over again was too high because like, of course, someone seeing like a vacuum of news media content would create a news feed eventually. It seemed pretty inevitable to me. So I figured I would take my existing feed, retool it a little bit and present it as an alternative trying to do things like as good as I could. I started promoting my own feed as a replacement, and required that all the orgs in it should have a verifiable domain handle. It quickly took off, and Bluesky's first-party app started surfacing it to new users, which caused adoption to like really skyrocket. Today the feed is simply called News, and is now it's like the eighth or ninth most liked feed on Bluesky. The above chart shows my first week of traffic to Fastly, which is a caching layer I added when the Brazilian migration began, and my server wasn't able to keep up with anything. If you can't see the numbers on this chart, you combine the hits and misses rows to get a daily total. And from this, roughly the mean daily mean is about 135,000 requests per day, which just boggles my mind. That's like several million like per month if it keeps up at this pace, which like I don't like I've worked on election coverage that doesn't get that kind of traffic. That like very few things I've worked on get anywhere near that traffic. It boggles my mind just every single day. So like I'll admit I was pretty content for that other news feed I mentioned earlier to become the popular one when it did, because it meant I didn't have to answer any of these questions, all which are potentially fraught given my profession. I used the question, is it a fire hose or a platform, in a recent blog post to open up a broader discussion about what role the feed has and what user expectations are. Recently, a former employer, who I intentionally didn't talk about earlier, joined the platform and asked for admission into the news feed. Those who aren't aware, that paper is not great in terms of its coverage of the trans community. I would say it's probably one of the ones that have published a lot more of the nonsense proliferate in the British media about trans people than a lot of other papers. I also don't have particularly fond memories of working there. And I kind of think that few trans people in the UK have the level of insight into exactly how bad that title is than I do. But I kind of felt it'd be a bit hypocritical if I blocked them over that. So I added them. Maybe that was a mistake. I don't know. But my feeling is that I want the newsfeed to be a fire hose. And if there are titles that people don't like in it, they can block those titles and use the same affordances of the platform to moderate their feed, much like you would any other feed. I don't really want to gatekeep access off of like any personal kind of political basis. I feel that's just really, that's, I really think personal curation should be left up to the user. And I don't think I should necessarily have much or any control over that. And like kind of the fact that I do is a bit of a curse. Going back to that Venn diagram earlier, if I let titles publish transphobia in the feed, I risk being accused of platforming that transphobia. If I block access to those titles, I risk being accused of gatekeeping and censorship by my, profession. There's really no way I can win if I exert any type of editorial control. So in some ways, I've just kind of decided not to where possible. But at the same time, like I do still kind of gatekeep. Like I decide I don't want random aggregators in the feed. Journalism should be original journalism, not reposting somebody else's journalism where possible. I've also placed a requirement that titles need an established presence, not, blogs of 100 people sort of thing. Though if it serves a particular community, I'm more willing to include them still, regardless of the audience size. And like I constantly worry that some of the titles that I've added will make me regret doing so. Like I already feel quite a few queries about the choices I've put into the feed. Though it's generally people complaining about paywalls. So yeah, I don't know. I really do my best to try and chart a course between communities who sometimes aren't necessarily on good terms with each other and often view each other with an immense degree of skepticism. But I'm only human and I'll probably screw up pretty badly at some point. But I'm doing my best and I try and be honest about, my limitations. If I'm completely honest, I would love it if like a really established industry organization like the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting took over the feed at some point. Having like NICAR run the feed, like having like an actual industry body, I think would probably be the best long-term result in the end because it would kind of prevent any one decision from being an individual choice. Um, So, like, I'm onto the second theme, which is like, how can people survive online? Right? First theme was how can news orgs survive online, but like, how can we make the excuse me, online experience like better for users and the people who are on the platform, who are the audience for all this content? Um, and it's also in some ways like a bit of my mea culpa for the news feed. If news content brings out some of the worst behaviors in people, how do we navigate a shared public space like Bluesky, where important political discourse is happening, but also the literal opposite of that, which is also important? Um, so this is like a chart I made and was published in the FT last year, discussing selective news avoidance. It depends on market, but close to 40% of respondents in the US and UK often or sometimes avoid news content. I don't have a chart for this year's data, but it's actually gone a few percentage points worse across the board. The challenges facing online news media are myriad, but I find this one particularly vexing. If we don't create better news consumption habits and better environments for people to consume news in, we risk people tuning out of news entirely, and as a result, becoming less informed about the world around them. I worry deeply sorry. Um, I worry deeply about the implications for a global society if that happens. So, like, some part of this is unavoidable because people tune out news for their own mental health, and they don't do it because they want to be willingly misinformed. It's worth noting that news avoidance trended upwards globally during the pandemic because honestly, like, who could blame people? I constantly find myself tuning out the news, and I literally work in it. There are two authors on Bluesky who've influenced my thinking more than most, and they're Fane Greenwood and Catherine Cross. This recent post by Greenwood really stuck in my mind for a few days now, because like, yeah, like I'm not even sure like the most introspective of us has really truly come to terms with how we've changed individually and collectively since 2020. I imagine myself in 2019 and myself now, and it feels like a lifetime ago. Um, and I suspect that particularly for trans people, many of us who have come out during this extremely tumultuous period haven't quite fully grasped how much of this era of endless conflict, what it's doing to our psyches and what's doing to our perceptions of people more generally. Um, it's a thing that uh, I constantly worry about, and I have like a lot of friends who spend like a lot of time in purely online spaces, and I worry it affects their worldview because it has been like, as per Fane's point, a very conflict heavy arena for many years now, it feels like. Um, on the right hand side, you have Log Off by Catherine Cross. Cross's book came out like a fortnight before the Aegis labeler shut down, and she herself hasn't really been on the platform since then. And I think it's a shame because Log Off is a fantastic book. Cringy chapter of Carrie, praise be damned. And in it, she discusses how the structure of social media results in forever wars between groups of entrenched dynamics, and the social aspect of social media often exacerbates these by pitting shit posters against earnest posters. It's worth reading. I highly recommend the book. Anyways, this next section is about why I shred my mental health to maintain a screenshot labeler. Behold, for it is XBlock. For anyone who found their way into this talk and didn't already know, XBlock is my attempt to make a third-party automated image labeler for Bluesky. If unaware, third-party labelers are accounts that are set up specifically for the purpose of applying labels to AT-Proto records and repos. Labelers can define a custom set of labels, and users who subscribe to those labels can see them annotating bits of content and accounts across Bluesky. This helps users who want to. So my particular one focuses purely on screenshots from across various social media platforms. And what I think ultimately this helps users do is avoid negative sentiment screenshot dunking behaviors. Um, XBlock, and I'll describe exactly what those behaviors are like in a minute. XBlock was one of the very first third-party labelers to go online. I followed the Bluesky team's pull requests, so I was ready to implement it as soon as the feature landed. There's something intrinsically cool about being able to see a feature slowly emerging towards shipping and being able to follow like how that's changing over time and build things that are ready for like day one release when a feature lands, just because like, the team that you're following is working in the open like that. I think there's something just super cool about that. Um, and also like XBlock as a concept, like it's not my idea. It's was formed by seeing like dozens of people who I don't even follow ask the questions like, oh, I really wish I could mute screenshots for like months and weeks before third-party labeler support even dropped. So it was such an obvious like, low-hanging fruit win that I was like, yeah, God, I should try that. Um, Posts are automatically moderated by an image classification model that I fine-tuned using thousands of screenshots that have been reported to the XBlock Ozone instance. For those who don't know, Ozone is the open source moderation interface provided by Bluesky. The model is run on an old desktop gaming PC sitting right down here. And is on my local home broadband network, consuming the Bluesky Firehose, is currently being run into the ground because the recent wave of traffic has significantly overwhelmed it. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second and how I plan to get back to good health. So, like, before I get into any of this, like, hold up, full disclaimer, I'm like another charlatan. There's no research in any of this. This is entirely just vibes that I felt by my experiences online. So this is entirely vibes-based development here. Um, but like screenshots have like many purposes. They can range from capturing a meme to spreading transphobic hate, racist hate, any amount of hate from any number of the lovely accounts on twitter.com or bluesky.social in some instances. There's in many ways, this is a learned behavior. Um, so yeah, like specifically what XBlock seeks to focus on is less the screenshots that are just, cute screenshots of memes that have been reposted from another platform. It's more to, help people avoid specifically screenshot dunking, which is kind of a learned behavior, to take a screenshot and invite ridicule upon the account depicted in the screenshot, which I kind of see as like a bit of a sad form of expressive behavior that frequently seeks to obviate the powerlessness one feels being at the mercy of the frequently oppressive nature of contemporary British and American society. And I wouldn't like necessarily seek to deprive anyone of that. Um, but speaking personally, like moving to Mastodon from Twitter for me was kind of game changing. Um, because Mastodon didn't have any quote tweet functionality at the time. I still think it doesn't actually. I haven't been on Mastodon in a while, but my understanding is it doesn't have quote tweet functionality, and because they saw it as a harassment vector. There's been some research kind of that's gone back about whether, that's necessarily the case. I don't necessarily think quote tweets unto themselves are like the harassment vector that Mastodon has presented them as. Um, but it is a vector for screenshot dunking. And so by and the, and so by requiring that, one, either there's no quote tweets, and what screenshot dunking does exist on Mastodon is usually behind a content warning. Um, it really, there's not so much of it on Mastodon. And going from Twitter, where there was just so much of it, particularly within the queer community, to where Mastodon, where it really wasn't, was really kind of illuminating for me in a lot of ways. In some ways, automated labeling of screenshots, that XBlock does, is a Bluesky extension of the Macedonian idea that you should label screenshots and other triggering imagery. Mastodon gets a lot of flack for its homeowners association approach to content warnings, and at least some of that flack is probably earned in my mind. But there's also something like kind of noble about trying to normalize good behaviors towards sharing content on nascent platforms, and I really can't blame them for trying. But what I love about the third-party labeler concept is you can ultimately do the same thing, but automate it and not have to try to enforce norms that often appear to be pretty arbitrary, especially for new users. So how many labels has XBlock created? This is a raw database dump from last night of all the positive label events, which are events where a label has been added to a post instead of removed. I assure you the one marked torture was a fat finger by me. I immediately removed it as soon as I realized that I had mislabeled. It's kind of the nature of Ozone that you can apply more labels than just the ones in your custom set. And they've kind of improved the user interface to kind of prevent that now, which is good. But yeah, it kind of shows the, kind of nature of the platform a little bit. Um, but anyways, what can we learn from like this data? Because like there's something here, right? Like, well, first off, ignore the uncategorized screenshot, unrecognized screenshot, and other screenshot categories. Those are me figuring things out still, clearly as evidenced by the fact that the word screenshot is, redundant. Um, also, ignore the Tumblr and Reddit and Instagram categories because I think the label is particularly inaccurate with those. I'd say anywhere from like 30 to 60% inaccurate. I've paused auto labeling for those labels, like just for that reason. It needs to be a lot more accurate before I enable auto labeling with those. Um, Also ignore the news and Discord screenshots because those are all hand labeled until I have a sufficiently big training set. I can't train the model on those. So currently those are just all hand labeled. We let people, I'm not sure if we still do, but yeah, for a while we let people submit reports and gradually add those to the training set. Um, but with all those caveats aside, like some things immediately stand out. Um, the vast majority of the screenshots are Twitter. Like there's more Twitter screenshots than like pretty much every other platform combined times two. Um, and that's partially just due to the fact that the system's trained on a lot of Twitter screenshots, so it's particularly good at recognizing those. And so it's labeled about 363,000 of them. Um, Following Twitter is Bluesky with almost 175,000 screenshots. And also note that all of these numbers are since XBlock began in around April this year is when I set up the current Ozone instance. Um, that's like a lot of screenshots. And like, yeah, like there's a lot of screenshots on the Bluesky Firehose, especially now. I heard a figure that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 300,000 a day now. So it feels that this is like a really low number, all things considered, considering just how much content is like now being emitted by the fire hose. I'll be very curious, like once I'm able to get the performance of the model kind of like running a bit better, whether I can, whether those numbers change and kind of what having access to the full fire hose really, does to it. Um, the other thing I just find fascinating is like, yeah, there's Facebook screenshots and yeah, there's Instagram screenshots, and like some of those are false positives for sure, but some of them are true positives, and there's like photos of them. But like there are no thread screenshots. There are twice as many Fediverse screenshots as there are thread screenshots. Like, like I don't get that. I don't understand. I've been trying to figure that out for forever. I find that wild. Like maybe my model is just really bad at detecting thread screenshots, so it just doesn't get any of them, and people just don't report them or something. Or maybe people don't care to share threads posts outside of threads via screenshots. Or maybe Threads is a utter Potemkin village of a platform. Nothing interesting actually is happening there. You be the judge. Um, I suspect the platform's avoidance of news and politics content does play into it somewhat, though. That's some of the most shareable content, and by kind of under, downgrading that in like a lot of ways, um, I imagine that's partially a result of it. So these are the general principles I built XBlock around. I wanted a moderation service that was kind of controversial and simply did a good job at one thing. I want to avoid endless discussions about whether a post was arguably something, whether, racist, transphobic, mean. like whatever. The beauty of XBlock is that like an image is generally either a screenshot or it's not a screenshot. It's not really rocket science. It's not hard to figure out one or the other. Um, and like additionally, when we label an image, we're not saying it's a no good, very bad screenshot dunk, and users should never, ever, 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 ever look at it. We say this is possibly a Twitter screenshot, and you can choose whether or not you want to look at it. That's what I mean by label the service, not the content. The idea is to take value judgments out of moderation with this and make it easier for moderators to independently make decisions without necessarily needing to constantly seek confirmation from another moderator before acting. And I think that's really powerful. Like that's how I let three like really lovely people I know only through Bluesky log into the queue and make moderation decisions for my service without needing like just endless oversight by myself. Also, shouts out to my moderators. They're all awesome, and I really, really appreciate them. They do an incredible job despite how completely low rent pretty much the entire operation is. And I'm very grateful for them. The second point, this list has an asterisk because I have labeled a few accounts, but like the screenshot bot and best of dying Twitter, I don't I don't think those are necessarily very controversial account level labels. I haven't, however, for instance, labeled George Takei's entire account, despite him mostly posting Twitter screenshots, or alternatively Aaron Rupar, who mostly posts a lot of supremely triggering Twitter and Truth Social content. And that's because neither has explicitly stated that all they're going to do is post such screenshots. If they ever did put in their bio, this account only posts screenshots, then yeah, give them a label. But unless they explicitly do, then that adds user surprise, and that's not something I want to do. Moderation decisions from XBlock should shouldn't feel like a decision was made about you. They should feel that it's just like a statement of fact. Yes, this is this, and so we have given it this label. People can choose whether they want to engage with it or not as a result of that. And like honestly, that last line summarizes the next 2 points pretty well. Like the last point I made about it should feel like a statement of fact, not a decision. That kind of summarized the last 2 points pretty well. If you don't know already, the model does in fact get things wrong. Actually, it does it extremely frequently. Once again, I've disabled all labeling for both Instagram and Reddit because it ranges between 30 and 60% false positive. It's not a very accurate model yet. But if something's mislabeled, users should expect to have that result with a minimum of fuss and debate. By assume the good in people, I mean generally accept someone's right if they're telling you that an image isn't actually a screenshot, like within reason. Like especially if it's someone just trying to put their art out there, like be accommodating. Like, you don't have to be mean about it. It's labeling screenshots. It's really not life or death. And the last few points are kind of about service related stuff, which is really bad right now, and I'm really sorry for that. Next slide. So this is the queue for Love, which is what I've called the desktop machine that runs XBlock's Inference engine. There are over 100,000 images waiting to be processed in this screenshot. I took this a few hours into me actually figuring out how Jazz's Jetstream endpoint worked. Within like about a day or so, it would grow to like 500,000. And so what was happening was that my crappy residential DSL line wasn't able to capture the fire hose fast enough with the default AT-Proto CBOR implementation. According to Jazz, a huge amount of fire hose traffic is validation information for blocks. So it's much easier for pure JSON Jetstream consumers to catch up by stripping all that validation info. And this was very much my experience. I normally had about 30 to 40 worker processes running at a time, parsing through the queue. And they managed to keep it to like, under 500. I thought I was doing really well. I was like really, really pleased with myself, catching up to the fire hose of only 30 or 40 instances. But then I switched to Jetstream and I realized that it wasn't in fact catching up. And I was quickly had a 500,000 post backlog and spiraling out of control at an even worse pace. Because it's a FIFO queue, first in, first out. That's a problem because when you have a delay that long, by the time the posts at the end of the queue finally get to the front of the queue, they will be so far out of date that any moderation action is completely pointless. So basically what I did is I switched back to the CBOR implementation of the Firehose consumer because even though it drops like way more packets than you know I'm able to handle, um, at least like my CPU can keep up with it. So yeah, there'll be a lot of misses for the immediate future, but I have a plan. There's only about 6 or so slides left, and thank you for bearing with me. I know this is a long presentation. So the only real answer for moving forward with XBlock is to redo the model. I figure it needs to be about 2 to 3 times faster, as well as more accurate. Making it accurate is actually probably easier because I have troves upon troves of training data now, as well as a lot of AWS credit that I can burn training the model in the cloud. Shouts out to Emily, who really helped nudge along that process, getting the AWS credit from the AT Proto grants approved. Very grateful. And yeah, so I can train them all to be more accurate now. That's not really the hard part at this point. The other thing I noticed that'll improve accuracy is I realized that there's kind of a pretty significant error in terms of how I've approached labeling, which is namely that the model is it's like a single label model. So it splits the classification space between all of the possible categories and gives you which one will be. And so it's like all the screenshot categories and a none of the above category. And none of the above category is trained on, I think, about 2 or 3 thousand just random posts taken off the fire hose. I have really no idea if there's any commonalities between those posts or anything. Maybe there's like some recurring features in like that, like none of the above data set that I'm not aware of, and any image that has those features. So twice as a problem is the more likely that a image is none of the above, the less likely it'll be one of the other categories. And similarly, if you have a screenshot that is a Twitter screenshot of, say, a Facebook screenshot, or an even better example, a Twitter screenshot of a Truth Social screenshot. It won't label it as either Twitter or Truth Social because effectively the probability space has been split. It's 50% chance of it being Truth Social, 50% chance of it being Twitter, and none of those are above I kind of vary my thresholds that I require. Some of them it's 95%, some of them it's like more like 85%, but it effectively splits the probability space so that none of them meet that threshold. So effectively, I need to retrain, and I need to do it as a multi-label thing, which means kind of, I think, using a sigmoid as like the final head of the inference output or something. My goal is to hopefully get that out in the next week or two. And hopefully that will improve accuracy like by a fair bit. The bigger issue is making it faster because I've fine-tuned the existing model on Google VitLarge 224 patch 16, which is a bit slower than VitBase, but more accurate as a result. I could throw more processing power at it locally, maybe get a few more servers in the cloud, but like the bills for all that inference would be really bad. And if I do it locally, like my partners will not be super stoked about the home broadband never having any bandwidth. So I'm still figuring out that bit. And like I kind of worry I'll have to be extremely creative to meet the demands of the increased fire hose, and that's not even talking about support for new things. Like I've already gotten my first feature request for labeling videos, and I'm just like I have no idea how I'm going to go anywhere near that challenge. And I'm kind of tempted to just like, punt. Like I'm very tempted to say that's not really in the scope of XBlock, which is a static image labeler, just because frankly that's already challenging enough as it is at the moment. But like I really enjoy XBlock. I find it like a really fun project, and I'll try to make it work as well as I can for as long as I can, and we'll see how it goes. I still have a lot of things to learn doing it, and a lot of ideas to try out yet, so we'll see. On to the last theme, which is how can people thrive online? Forget about surviving online. Let's thrive online a little bit. And this is the last section before the Q&A. Thanks for listening to all those heavy bits. I want to finally talk about how we create spaces for people to not only communicate online, but thrive online. I've discussed quite a few puzzle pieces so far that hopefully fit into a broader picture of what online social media use can look like. There's one last piece missing, and it goes back to all that internet culture stuff that I front-loaded the talk with. How do we create tools and provide that open wilderness, that empty canvas, that limitless sea that excited me so much about the internet in my teens? Can we get back to having fun online again? So my guess is we do that by empowering creators with expressive tools. If unaware, I'm working on a project to add a custom emoji rich text facet to AT Proto platforms. I'm not standing up a bunch of tools, I'm not standing up a bunch of servers, though I'm providing some helper libraries. I'm mainly conducting like a request for comment process and building a spec, which I plan to release into the world as a lexicon. Developers can already implement my demos if they want, though the spec is subject to change, so I've encouraged people to hold off kind of for the moment. By the way, that party paired flashing sparkle heart, that's my own creation. I'm very proud of it. It's not the first party parrot-ish emoji I ever made, though. I have a repo on my GitHub where I extracted every emoji from the Unicode 14 set and ran the party parrot interpolation on it. It's very silly. The repo is called Party Everything. It's very silly. I love rainbow flashing things. Very gay. I get. I love it. It's how I do. Um, but yeah, the first screenshot on like the left is kind of the first prototype I had of Bluemoji. It's an observable notebook I use to prototype interface ideas. I love observable for testing out ideas because it means I don't have to write a ton of interface code or event handling code. And by letting users see the code in each shell, it's kind of like a Jupyter notebook sort of thing, observable. But kind of more for front-end codes used pretty widely within the data viz community. It kind of acts as a bit of documentation by having that notebook style. Um, they're kind of annoying to use for a serious interface, but they're great for proof of concepts. You do have to manage loading all of the modules and dependencies via ESM over the web without build tools, which can be a bit challenging. But it's a really great way for prototyping stuff. A lot of my Mastodon tools I prototyped using observable. Um, the second screenshot shows the Bluemoji Toolbox app I'm working on. I want it to look like the Linux ncurses user interface library because like I love that aesthetic, and devs on Bluesky are seemingly making modern web text look very archaic, like very archaic display technology. Is kind of like a trend I've noticed, which I think is just like awesome. I'm so here for it. Um, it's honestly working on Bluemoji and working on the interface. It's the most fun I've had with like a web project in ages. Um, like I literally built a micro React component library for creating this silly style of interface. It's silly. I love it. So the idea of Bluemoji is you can upload either static or animated square images to your repo, and then you can surface them using your preferred client-rich text editor. This requires the people implementing it to build some sort of interface, which is probably a whole non-normative best practices RFC at some point, and like very dependent on the people who are implementing interfaces. Other people with a supporting client will be able to see those custom emojis. People with clients that don't support Bluemoji will get some kind of fallback. Still figuring out what the best way to handle that is. Maybe it's some generic placeholder like the Unicode square box, but maybe a bit different shape. Or like a user-defined combination of emojis. So for instance, if you had like, blowing a blue heart kiss emoji, you could call it like, blue kiss or something like that. Use like the, red heart kiss emoji and then like a blue heart to kind of show what that's meant to kind of convey. Or just like a bit of text with colons on each side of it, which is kind of how fallbacks work in Mastodon. Um, or maybe like third-party clients will let users choose which style of fallback they want to use. Like it's kind of open. I try not to be like super normative about it, but like I think I probably do need to give like some recommendations how I think it should be expected to work. The other affordances is that users will be able to curate Bluemoji from their collections into packs, which are similar to how starter packs work. Users can share these packs, allowing people to add like a whole bunch of Bluemoji at one time or add individual Bluemojis from those packs to their own collection, renaming them as they add them if they want to. Um, I'm still kind of figuring out like permissions models and kind of like licensing kind of ideas and things of that nature with that. So like anyone who has ideas like about that, like please talk on the RFC. That's a very open discussion, and like all feedback is very, very welcome right now. Um, Another big goal is animation. Though I do want to give people control over whether looping animation automatically plays the speed at which it plays, a few things like that. Um, the plan is to support animated GIFs, animated PNGs, and Lottie. The last of which I'm particularly excited about. It's kind of like a SVG with animation instructions thing. There's like really good first-party support in like After Effects. There's a web-based creation tool called Lottie Files, which is really cool. That kind of like beating heart sort of animation of my party heart emoji is a easing that I applied via the Lottie Files editor to my initial party heart emoji. It took me like 5 minutes to do that way. It has like some amazing like great easings using like prompts and stuff like that. It's super cool. Um, and yeah, like it simplifies a lot of like the more challenging aspects of animation. Um, I was really close to having Bluemoji like kind of ready for beta before the Brazil migration began. But I've kind of been like a little bit busy between firefighting my poor flaming servers and building content for the upcoming US election as part of my day job. I really want to have XBlock at full strength before October if possible, because I feel the last month of the election is going to be particularly poisonous for trans people. And I want my tools for avoiding such content to be as high quality as possible before then. So that's kind of taking my focus at the moment. Um, Definitely hoping for a Bluemoji release before Christmas, though. Um, but please forgive if it's taken some time because it's by its nature an extremely collaborative project. It involves a lot of consensus building, a lot of finding people who are attending to implement that sort of thing. And it simply won't happen if third-party implementers think something's wrong with it or aren't interested in it. So it's very much about driving consensus and building consensus over time. And yeah, that's it. That's I think wow, I think I was almost exactly on at an hour. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's
Um,
amazing. Thank you very much for starters. This is applause that we do on video. Uh, does anyone have a question that you want to ask? I have a couple queued, but anyone else have a question to ask?
well, pretty cheap.
I'll go back to your I'll go ahead and ask a question. Going back to your news feed. So right now, the only judgment that you're doing for news feed is basically getting people to have a verified domain mapped.
Uh, yeah, so I kind of like came up with about 3 or 4 criteria in like a recent blog post I published on my website Ændra.com. Um, Kind of like my criteria are. The first thing is it has to produce original journalism. No aggregators, no AI generated slop. Has to produce real journalism by real people. The second thing is that there needs to be a verified domain name, so I can tell that the organization who's posting that is in fact that organization. Um, I have a very tentative like audience requirement. If you're trying to be like a national news media operation, I ask that you have at least 10,000, daily consumers, which is pretty easy for any kind of like major media org. A little bit harder for blogs, a little bit harder for like online based things, but a lot of online media sort of focuses on very specific kind of audiences. And so I'm like a lot more lenient for people, for organizations that have a particular audience that they're appealing towards that might be a little bit smaller. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much it at the moment, really.
Awesome, thank you. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, this was very interesting. Thanks for sharing. My question is about the AI. So you mentioned you don't want AI generated content, but I imagine in the next 3 to 4 years, the generative AI content will be virtually indistinguishable from real content, even video. How do you plan on dealing with that? Are you going to leverage some of the internal cryptography of the app protocol to verify the posts? Or are you just going to rely on the domains and assume that they're not going to publish AI generated content? Have you thought about this?
That is a very good question. And like, we're seeing like more AI tools make inroads into journalism kind of as time goes on. Um, I I think it's a little bit unavoidable. Like, in a lot of ways, like if people aren't using like full on write a prompt into a thing and generate some content that way type of AI, then at least they'll be using AI in some other capacity. So it is a little bit unavoidable, and it does seem a little bit like disingenuous to sort of like take a really hard stance on it. I don't know, maybe that'll change. Maybe I'll have to rely a lot more on like, spending time gatekeeping and like looking into what the title publishes before actually letting them on. Maybe I just can't hold that line like forever. I don't know. Like we'll kind of see how things go over time. I'm 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 trying to keep an open mind wherever possible about kind of like everything. So we'll see how it goes.
Cool.
Nick.
Awesome. First, Andrew, thank you so much. It has been fantastic hearing about your lived experience and the weird ass shit that you've had to deal with growing and developing on the internet. I think having you share this is invaluable to creating a more diverse developer ecosystem, and it helps ward out people who don't like it and get the ick from it, and they can just f off. The actual technical question is, how much of your experimentation and infrastructure is like actually running in your residence, machines whirling under the desk? And what are your thoughts on how that impacts the accessibility of developing against the sort of larger app protocol ecosystem? Since Paul's looking at the atmosphere.
It's a great question, and like I really I really appreciate it because that like the fact that I'm able to run this stuff off of just like random machines in my flat, I just find hilarious. Like I think that's great. Like, I joke with my partners like all the time that like, yeah, clearly we're a tech incubator because we have Raspberry Pis running in the kitchen, right? Like, it's like I'm the pro in some ways the proximity of my life to like Erwin Bachman from Silicon Valley is like a little bit sort of like hilarious. Just random things happening in my flat. But yeah, so like the main inference machine is an old gaming PC sitting right next to me. I have a Raspberry Pi sitting in my partner's room downstairs, and that's kind of it. So like the Raspberry Pi runs Ozone. I think that's it at the moment. The stuff for like the newsfeed is all in the cloud. I could probably run, honestly, like the main feed engine for the news feed off of like my local infrastructure if I really wanted to, because Fastly kind of takes like 98% of the traffic. Um, so like, but yeah, like I could pretty much run everything that I have off of local infrastructure, which like it really helps because like particularly when you're building out things for like a mass audience on like a nascent platform, like you're like, your mind immediately goes to like, okay, so what if hoping against hope the thing's actually successful and it like scales in ways that I can't even begin to imagine. And so you kind of accept that as like a risk on some level that like you might need to navigate at some point. And it's a lot, I find it a lot less intimidating for me to navigate that challenge using infrastructure that if it explodes, it's just like, oh well, I have another piece of broken technology in my home add to the pile, versus like, oh wow, I have an AWS bill to several dozens of thousands of dollars suddenly. So like, yeah, like having like not really having to worry about like your hosting costs just like spiral in ways that you can't really predict is like really, really nice and really does improve accessibility for like people who are doing hobbyist projects like these.
Amazing. Paul, we'll come back to
Hey,
you.
Andrew, it's really good to finally get to meet you. And by the way, they're testing fire alarms, so if something goes off, that's what that is. So you have played with like feeds, you've played with labelers, two things that we kind of got a V1 out there and then haven't really touched a whole lot since then. And I'm curious what your top like asks are in that zone. What are you hoping gets brought in terms of expanding on those protocols or how they work inside of the application?
So custom feeds, like I'd say my two biggest sort of asks for like custom feeds would be like the ability to do pin posts. At the moment, like the newsfeed had a pin post for a while, but in order to achieve a sort of like ability to hide that post, I think I implemented the pin post functionality for the newsfeed before the hide post functionality existed or something. But anyways, to be able to check whether someone had like liked that post yet and thus hide it, I was doing like a request on every like time someone hit the thing, so I wasn't really able to make it as like stateless as it is now. So having some kind of like affordance within the custom feed record or something that allowed for like a pin post would be really, really nice. The other affordance for custom feeds would be the ability to transfer a feed from one account to another. I have no idea how challenging that would be from a protocol perspective, but I kind of suspect that there'll be a point where it might make sense for me to transfer like the news feed to like a more sustainable org who's focused on doing this kind of work and isn't like open to individual pressure to make changes to that thing. But honestly, one of my biggest concerns with the newsfeed is that like people start pressuring me and like start mounting pressure campaigns for me to do something to the feed in one way or the other. And like as an individual, I'm probably pretty susceptible to those kinds of tactics. A independent media org would be less so. Yeah, so those are the ones I can think of most of custom feeds at the moment, especially for like my particular use of custom feeds. I've done a few like sundry experiments with like creating more algorithmic feeds and like I think if someone created like something like Sky Feed but added like a mode that allows you to do like a what's hot style sort of like ranking or something like that, that'd be really cool. But it's kind of hard to do that without like kind of opinionating kind of how things work a little bit more, I think. Yeah, in terms of like third-party labelers, having I had a really good feature request for those the other day. Kind of like, let me get back to you on that. I think kind of like this, informative labels is kind of like a broader kind of like topic. And a lot of the more successful third-party labels are like informative labels, not like, moderation labels. I think there's some discussion about creating styles of labels that don't really have the moderation effects, like, show, hide sort of thing. But yeah, like that'd be really helpful. There was, yeah, those are the ones I can think of just immediately off the top of my head.
Awesome. Nick, you had another question.
Oh, yeah. So I'm just going to read it so I don't forget already. Yeah, so there's obviously been a huge growth in non-English speaking audiences and users. That's fantastic. How do you think that's going to impact tools like this? I don't know much about the internals of XBlock, so you bear with some of my assumptions, but I'm assuming it's not doing any like textual or contextual, or sorry, textual like parsing or anything like sort of in that way. But with more languages and difference in regional localization, locale, etc., ways of handling content, it's going to add a lot of variety to how things work. So how do you do you have any concern that we're going to have like regional or language-based sort of isolation or segregation in some of these sort of top-level services, and how do you foresee us as sort of a community not falling into that trap? I guess if we don't want to.
Interesting. Well, like one thing is that like XBlock is very like kind of English language centric at the moment. I would really love to get like some translations of the labels so that I can provide like language, like localization of those labels. But like I'm a little bit hesitant to just put them through Google Translate or whatever. I should probably get some actual native language speakers to, provide those translations. So like, but yeah, in terms of like the actual internals and training it and stuff like that, it's yeah, like I think I noticed like a little bit when there was like kind of like that huge like initial like Japanese exit kind of migration to Bluesky, because like of just how much different like Japanese characters look. And also just how often different looking like Japanese user interfaces often are. Like it was, there's a few more misses, but I think it still managed to catch them like predominantly. What I think the model picks up on most is things like shapes and textures and things like bevels and border radiuses and stuff like that. Um, it picks up on like kind of like distinct design features that are consistent across UIs. So it doesn't do any like OCR or anything that's like, very like language specific. Will like that, you know, like over time, will that change, and will it maybe necessarily, will I need to ultimately train multiple models for multiple styles of language? Like it's a possibility. I wouldn't rule it out. It also like help for parallel processing probably, because I would like, pipe all the, Portuguese posts to the Portuguese language model that's been weighted for services that, are more common within, that cluster. So maybe it's like, yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think it is something that like, we do need to pay attention to, because the network has been so very like English language centric for like so much of it. Not kind of like assuming that, the English language cluster is like the only cluster is very important. I think like what I love about the huge like, recent Brazilian migration is it's really proven that like it's not just, English speakers on the platform. It's lots of people from a lot of places, and we should try and support them all as much as we can, right?
I think the mapping of domain names literally from the top has caused a pretty interesting cascade of many other people within Brazil to there's a whole set of people who are like, the stupid username is too long. But I've participated in a bunch of threads that have ended up in sort of learning journeys of that in interesting ways. So yeah, be interesting to see what happens there. Any other questions for Andra? Amazing. Thank you again. That was amazing run through. It was really great to go through how you've gotten here and your work in journalism. And there's just like a lot of really meaty stuff in there as well, plus the really interesting things that you implemented. So really appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording and we'll have a little bit of off the record time. I don't have anything scheduled yet for next week. We'll see how that goes. I've got lots of interest in other things going, but thank you again for coming along.
Thanks for having